The aliens had expected him to cry, to scream, to break down into a pathetic heap within the first few hours. Instead, Jacob leaned back against the smooth obsidian rock, pulled a small packet of trail mix from his cargo pocket, and chewed leisurely while staring up at the sky. Above him, 2 suns burned through a lavender haze, casting long shadows across the jagged plains of Zyrith-9. The planet was infamous throughout the galaxy for being a survival crucible, a place where oxygen was thin, predators were apex in every sense of the word, and water had to be scavenged in crystalline caves guarded by venomous insectids the size of wolves. For the Tvak Dominion, it was the ultimate test of worthiness. Criminals, rebels, and sometimes troublesome guests from other species were dropped here. If they survived 30 days, they were deemed useful assets. If they didn't, well, the vultures of Zyrith didn't leave much behind. Jacob wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a rebel. He wasn't even officially a guest. He was a human contractor, a consultant, if you wanted to be generous, who'd been brought in to assist with the Dominion's agricultural program. He'd shown them how to fertilize soils using compost, how to rotate crops, how to build basic irrigation systems with minimal resources. His last presentation had been on earthworms. Apparently, he'd also annoyed the hell out of someone high up. The guards hadn't given him much warning, just a rough shove into the loading bay of a shuttle, followed by a sneer. Let's see how the primitive ape fares on Zyrith. 30 days. If he lives, we'll consider him amusing. That was 48 hours ago. Now, instead of sobbing or clawing at the dirt, Jacob hummed softly to himself and made notes in a battered waterproof notebook he'd somehow managed to keep. Page 1 read. Zyrith-9 Survival Log. Day 2, suns are brutal. Water scarce but not impossible. Food equals plentiful if you're not squeamish. Atmosphere equals thin but manageable, thanks, cardio training. Locals equals want to eat me. Also, these idiots really don't understand humans. He chuckled at that last line and popped another almond into his mouth. Because here was the thing, Earth had already tested humanity with survival hellholes. Jungles that baked and drowned you in the same day. Deserts where water was more precious than gold. Mountains where the air got thin enough to kill, and still, climbers lined up to conquer them. Humans had learned to not only endure hardship but to monetize it. Whole industries thrived on people voluntarily paying to survive for fun. And Jacob, well, Jacob had grown up camping with a father who thought the Appalachian Trail was a casual weekend stroll. He'd learned to fish with nothing but dental floss and a bent paperclip. He'd once spent a week in Alaska with nothing but a hatchet and a tarp because his friends thought it would be funny. Compared to that, Zyrith-9 was exotic. Dangerous, sure, but also fascinating. Take the plants, for example. Earlier that morning, Jacob had stumbled across a grove of thick, spiny stalks that oozed a syrup when cut. The syrup tasted bitter at first, but after boiling, it became sweet, like molasses mixed with citrus. He'd already started collecting it in a makeshift container made from hollowed rock. And the predators? Oh, the predators were terrifying. But also weirdly lazy. He'd spotted a 6-legged reptilian beast that looked like a Komodo dragon with armored plating, but instead of attacking him, it had lounged under the shade of a jagged boulder, yawning. Jacob had laughed aloud. Even monsters need nap time, he'd muttered, sketching it in his notebook. Still, there were dangers he couldn't ignore. Last night, the skies had come alive with winged things, leathery creatures with spines for tails and mouths that clicked like scissors. They'd circled above him, screeching, until Jacob had figured out that fire drove them away. He'd spent most of the night feeding a campfire with dried brush, grinning as the predators hissed in frustration. Fire! He said aloud to no one but himself. The universal no button. But the real kicker, the thing that had made Jacob laugh so hard he nearly choked on a piece of dried fig, was the survival kit they'd left him. It contained a blunt knife, barely sharp enough to cut grass. A plastic canteen with a crack in it. A single strip of nutrient paste that tasted like cardboard. And, bizarrely, a collapsible hammock. Jacob had stared at it for 5 minutes before bursting into hysterical laughter. They gave me a hammock! A hammock! What the hell am I supposed to do with this? Take a nap while something eats me? Except, he had used it. Not to sleep in, but as a net. He'd strung it between 2 jagged rocks and caught 3 fat, rabbit-like creatures with antennae. He'd skinned them carefully, roasted the meat over his fire, and jotted down a note. Tastes like chicken, with a hint of shrimp. By the end of day 2, Jacob had a rhythm. Explore by daylight. Collect resources. Sketch wildlife. Build fire before dusk. Cook dinner. Sleep in short shifts, waking often to throw more wood into the flames. And though his muscles ached, his lips were cracked from the dry air, and the ever-present sense of being watched tickled the back of his mind, he wasn't despairing. If anything, he was amused. Because he knew. He knew the aliens were watching. Hidden cameras, surveillance drones, cloaked satellites, didn't matter. They had to be monitoring him. That was the whole point of the survival test. They wanted to see him panic, to crumble, to become a begging wretch crawling on all fours for mercy. Instead, they were getting a camping trip. Jacob grinned at the thought. He pictured some alien officer watching the feed, scratching its head in confusion as the primitive ape not only survived but relaxed. So, on the morning of day 3, Jacob decided to up the ante. He stood on a cliff overlooking the purple desert below, cupped his hands around his mouth, and shouted into the alien wilderness. Welcome to Camp Human! All-inclusive resort! Meals provided daily, entertainment guaranteed. Book your stay now, vacancies are limited. His voice echoed through the canyons, startling a flock of bird things into flight. Jacob bowed theatrically to his invisible audience, then sat cross-legged to plan the next phase of his vacation resort. The stakes, of course, were deadly serious. He knew that. One mistake, a misstep near a venomous nest, a moment's lapse when the predators descended, a night without fire, and he'd end up as bones on alien soil. But humans had always coped with terror the same way: humor, stubbornness, and a knack for turning misery into a story worth telling. And Jacob, despite being stranded light years from Earth, wasn't about to let an audience, alien or otherwise, walk away thinking humans were weak. He licked syrup off his fingers, flipped to a new page in his notebook, and wrote: Project Vacation Spot. Goals: build proper shelter. Create food. Menu: establish entertainment system. Fire dances? Storytelling? Invite predators as special attractions for the guests. He underlined the last line twice, laughing until his stomach hurt. Somewhere, surely, an alien officer was screaming in frustration. And that thought alone made survival worth it. The first sign that things were about to get harder came at dawn on the 5th day. Jacob was crouched over his fire pit, blowing gently on the embers while gnawing on the last of the antenna rabbit meat, when the ground beneath him trembled. At first, he thought it was just another tremor. Zyrith 9 had a habit of rumbling like a half-awake giant turning in its sleep. But then the sound followed, a low, guttural roar that rolled across the rocky plain like thunder. Jacob froze, meat still in hand. Right, he muttered. Guess the resort needs a bigger security system. The roar came again, closer now, followed by a heavy thump-thump-thump that rattled the stones near his campfire. Dust plumed into the pale morning sky. Something was moving, something very, very large. Jacob scrambled to his vantage point on the cliffside, squinting into the lavender haze. At first, all he saw was the shifting mirage of desert heat. Then it appeared, a beast easily 3 stories tall, plated in shimmering scales that refracted the twin suns like armor. Its head resembled that of a crocodile, but its body was more like a gorilla's, hunched and bristling with muscle. Each step sent shockwaves through the ground. Jacob let out a low whistle. Well, he said, jotting into his notebook, kaiju problem? Potential tourist attraction if handled right. He could almost picture the alien overseers tearing out what counted for their hair. The survival test wasn't supposed to be about thriving. It wasn't about taking notes, naming monsters, or turning the deadliest planet in the sector into a brochure-worthy destination. It was about fear. And Jacob refused to give them the satisfaction. Still, his amusement didn't change the reality. If that thing wandered closer, his fire pit, hammock trap, and camp human were going to be nothing but a smear under its claws. So he got creative. Step 1: Diversion. He gathered the leftover bones from his rabbit dinner and rubbed them with syrup from the spiny plants. Then he hurled them as far as he could into a ravine 100 meters from camp. Step 2: Fire. He dragged brush and dried leaves into a second pit and lit them up, creating a smoky lure near the same ravine. Step 3: Retreat. He scrambled up higher onto the cliffside, notebook clutched under one arm, ready to observe. The beast lumbered into view minutes later, its nostrils flaring. It caught the scent of smoke and syrup, bellowed once, and turned its massive bulk toward the ravine. Jacob watched, breath held, as it sniffed the bones, pawed at the ground, then roared with what sounded like satisfaction before moving on. Jacob exhaled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he whispered, "Camp Human remains open for business." But the victory was short-lived. Because Zyrith 9 was escalating. On day 6, a storm rolled in, not of rain, but of razor-sharp crystalline shards carried on screaming winds. Jacob had just enough warning to duck into a cave he'd scouted earlier. The storm shredded everything outside, carving jagged scars into the rock, tearing apart his fire pit, scattering his food stores. When the winds finally calmed hours later, Jacob stepped outside to survey the wreckage. His carefully stacked supply of syrup containers? Gone. His hammock net trap? Torn to ribbons. His fire pit? Reduced to rubble. For a moment, just a brief flicker, despair threatened. 30 days suddenly felt like 30 years. Then Jacob's lips curved. "All right," he said to the empty air. "You want to play hardball? Let's upgrade the resort. Deluxe package. 5-star survival." And so began the reinvention of Camp Human. He rebuilt from scratch, this time thinking like both a survivor and an entrepreneur. Shelter. Instead of a flimsy lean-to, Jacob carved deeper into the cave, using broken shards from the storm as cutting tools. He created alcoves for storage, a fire nook with smoke venting out through a natural fissure, and even a sleeping platform raised off the ground. "Presidential suite," he joked as he lay down that night. Food. With his syrup lost, Jacob turned to experimentation. He discovered that the antenna rabbits avoided certain glowing fungi that grew in the caves. Testing cautiously, he found the fungi edible for humans, chewy, earthy, and oddly spicy. Paired with rabbit meat, it made a surprisingly balanced meal. He began sketching recipes. Water. He followed insected trails to a crystalline cavern where condensation dripped steadily from stalactites. By placing flat shards beneath the drops, he created a crude collection system. Soon he had more water than he could carry. Entertainment. Jacob began arranging polished stones into patterns near his camp, like a rock garden. It served no purpose except to pass time and look nice, but he laughed aloud as he worked. "Resort amenities," he explained to the silent cameras. "Guests expect atmosphere." The more the planet fought him, the more determined Jacob became to twist every hardship into an opportunity. Day 9 brought insected raiders, towering creatures with 6 limbs, chitinous armor, and serrated mandibles. They found his camp, clicking and screeching as they advanced. Jacob's heart pounded as he grabbed his blunt knife, fully aware it was little more than a butter spreader against these things. But he didn't fight fair. Humans rarely did. Instead, he lit torches, several he prepared earlier, and hurled them into the brush around the camp. Flames erupted, encircling the insectids. They shrieked, mandibles clattering, before scattering back into the wilderness. Jacob slumped against the cave wall afterward, shaking with adrenaline. "Note to self," he muttered. "Advertise fire show entertainment for premium guests." And yet, each brush with death also gave him an odd sense of empowerment. The planet threw monsters, storms, starvation, and venom at him, and still he stood. Still he laughed. Still he sketched new plans for Camp Human. The challenge wasn't breaking him, it was energizing him. And perhaps most dangerously for the TVAC Dominion, Jacob was beginning to realize something important. Survival was no longer enough. He could win here. He could turn their trial into a stage. That night, as he sat by his fire inside the cave, he raised a cup of freshly collected water and a mock toast to the invisible watchers. "Here's to 10 days down," he said. "And to 20 more of showing you how humans vacation in hell." He drank, grinning into the flames. Far away, on a Dominion battleship orbiting Zyrith 9, an officer slammed its claws against the console. The human was not supposed to thrive. He was supposed to suffer. The feed showed him building, cooking, laughing, thriving. And worst of all, the alien analysts watching alongside the officer were murmuring among themselves. "His methods are adaptive. He converts threats into resources. He reframes hardship as leisure. Fascinating." The officer hissed, furious. But Jacob didn't know any of this. All he knew was that tomorrow, he was going to start carving a giant sign into the cliffside. A sign that read, "Welcome to Camp Human, where survival is just the beginning." And maybe, just maybe, he'd add a star rating under it. By the 15th day, Jacob was running out of room in his notebook. Every page was filled with sketches, notes, sarcastic advertisements for Camp Human, and ideas for ridiculous amenities. The cliffside sign had taken him 3 days to carve, but now it stood proudly over the valley in jagged letters. "Welcome to Camp Human, 5-star experience guaranteed." He'd even drawn a little stick figure human waving cheerfully next to it. Jacob found himself laughing more often than not. Yes, the planet still tried to kill him daily. Yes, every breath was thin and scratchy, and his body bore a map of cuts and bruises. But his stubbornness turned each new horror into part of the joke. He'd even started talking to an imaginary guest, Mr. Smith, our valued visitor, whenever he introduced a new feature. "Ah, Mr. Smith, tonight's menu is roasted antenna rabbit paired with spicy cave fungus. And for entertainment, a fire dance featuring yours truly." But Zyrith 9 had been holding back. He didn't know it yet, but the test climax was coming. It began with silence. Jacob had grown used to the sounds of Zyrith, the distant roars, the shrieks of predators, the whispery clicking of insectids in the brush. But on day 16, the wilderness went still. Too still. Even the twin suns seemed muted, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Jacob frowned as he stepped out of the cave, shading his eyes. His instincts prickled. On Earth, silence in the wild almost always meant one thing: something big was hunting. Sure enough, the ground began to tremble. This time, it wasn't the 3-story reptilian gorilla. This was different, heavier, slower, deliberate. Jacob climbed to his lookout point and froze. Across the valley, emerging from a cleft in the jagged mountains, came the largest creature he had yet seen. It was a nightmare stitched together from Earth's worst predators: centipede-like body, 30 meters long, armored segments glistening like steel. A head shaped like a hammerhead shark, with 6 glowing eyes and mandibles that clacked like guillotines. Dozens of legs gouged the earth as it moved, each step a drumbeat of doom. Jacob exhaled through his teeth. Oh, hell no. That's not a tourist attraction. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. He scribbled quickly in his notebook, Day 16. Meet the ultimate boss monster. Will require deluxe package amenities to survive. The creature, later dubbed Centigorgon, in Jacob's notes, was hunting. Its eyes swept the valley, glowing faintly in the haze. Its mandibles snapped as it sniffed the air. And unfortunately, Jacob's cliffside sign caught the sunlight just right. The reflection glittered, and Centigorgon's eyes snapped toward it. "Ah, crap," Jacob muttered. The beast let out a roar so loud it cracked stone. Then it began moving toward Camp Human. Jacob's pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't something he could simply divert with bones or scare with fire. This thing was an extinction event wrapped in armor. But then, his lips twisted into a grin. "All right," he said aloud. "Final boss battle. Let's make this resort legendary. Step 1: Traps." Jacob spent frantic hours digging pitfall trenches near the base of the cliff, lining them with jagged storm shards. He smeared syrup across rocks to lure smaller creatures in, knowing the scent might distract Centigorgon. Step 2: Firestorm. He gathered every scrap of brush, fungus, and dry plant he'd collected, piling it into makeshift pyres along the cliffside. If he could ignite them at the right time, maybe he could blind or disorient the monster. Step 3: Psychological warfare. Jacob carved crude humanoid figures out of stone and wood, lining them across the camp like sentries. From a distance, in the smoke and firelight, they might look like an army. He didn't know if it would work. He only knew he refused to give the aliens the satisfaction of watching him run. By dusk, Centigorgon had reached the valley floor. Its mandibles clicked as it crushed rocks like brittle candy. Jacob lit his first pyre, sending flames leaping into the sky. The beast roared, eyes narrowing. Then it charged. Jacob's heart slammed against his ribs. He sprinted to the trenches, lighting pyres as he went. The cliffs filled with smoke and fire, shadows dancing across the humanoid decoys. For a moment, Centigorgon hesitated, then plunged forward, crashing through the first line of traps. Shards tore into its legs, drawing a spray of dark, steaming blood. It screeched, thrashing, mandibles snapping. Jacob hurled a flaming torch into its face, the fire bursting across one of its eyes. The monster shrieked louder, thrashing against the cliffs. Jacob scrambled higher, lungs burning. "Mr. Smith!" he yelled, voice hoarse. "Resort upgrade! Complimentary monster fight included!" Centigorgon lunged upward, mandibles clashing inches from Jacob's perch. He ducked, rolling onto a ledge, clutching his cracked canteen like a weapon. This was it. Do or die. With shaking hands, Jacob lit his last pyre. The flames shot up, smoke curling into the beast's face. Blinded, furious, it reared back, then drove its massive bulk against the cliff. The stone shuddered, splitting. Jacob barely kept his grip as boulders rained down. Then, with a thunderous roar, Centigorgon slipped into the largest trench, its armored body impaled on the storm shards. The beast writhed, blood boiling in the firelight, then collapsed with a final screech that echoed for miles. Silence returned to the valley. Jacob lay sprawled on the cliffside, chest heaving, covered in dust and sweat. His ears rang, his muscles screamed, and every instinct begged him to collapse. Instead, he dragged himself upright, limped to the edge, and raised his arms high. "And that?" he shouted hoarsely into the alien wilderness. "I ask how Camp Human handles customer complaints." His laughter broke into coughs, but it didn't matter. He had faced Xyritha's deadliest predator and lived. He had turned a death sentence into a victory speech. Somewhere above, orbiting in the cold dark, the Dominion's watchers stared in stunned silence. The human hadn't just survived. He had conquered. He had mocked them, taunted them, turned their sacred crucible into a comedy stage, and slain the monster they used as the test's final arbiter. The officer who had ordered Jacob's trial snarled in fury. Impossible. He was supposed to die. But another alien, an older one with glimmering eyes, only whispered, "No, he was supposed to reveal what humans truly are." And Jacob, sitting cross-legged on the broken cliff, scratched into his notebook. Day 16. Resort now offers extreme adventure package. Monster battles included. Survivors get bragging rights. Then he leaned back, exhausted but grinning. He wasn't finished yet. He still had 14 days to go. And by the time this was over, Camp Human wasn't just going to be a survival story. It was going to be legend. By day 25, Jacob's vacation resort no longer looked like a desperate survivor's camp. The cliffside bore his jagged sign, now expanded with 5 stars crudely carved underneath. The cave had transformed into something halfway between a cabin and a lounge, with shelves lined with polished shards, racks of drying meat, and a raised sleeping platform he proudly referred to as the king-size bed. Outside, he had stacked stones into neat paths leading to his fire pits. The rock garden had expanded into spirals and patterns that actually looked decorative. And most importantly, the corpse of Centigorgon lay in the valley below, a monument to human stubbornness. The vultures and insectoids had stripped it down to gleaming bones, which Jacob had gleefully incorporated into Camp Human's aesthetic. The massive ribcage now arched over his fire pit like some kind of prehistoric gazebo. If any alien guest had arrived, they might have mistaken the place for a rustic wilderness retreat, if you ignored the constant threat of venomous death lurking just outside. Jacob treated it exactly that way. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Camp Human," he announced each morning to the empty sky, standing atop the ribcage with arms spread wide. "Today's activities include guided hikes through predator-infested canyons, hands-on spear-building workshops, and, if you're lucky, spotting one of our famous giant lizard things napping under a rock. Truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience." He laughed, and then coughed, because the air was still thin, and survival was still hard. But the laughter always came back. Humor kept his mind sharp. Humor turned fear into fuel. Still, Jacob knew the test wasn't just about lasting 30 days. The Dominion had expected him to break, to crawl, to beg. But now that he'd refused? He suspected they had something else planned for the finale. And he was right. On day 27, the storm came. This wasn't like the crystalline shard storm from before. This was something deeper, darker, primal. The twin suns vanished behind bruised clouds. The wind screamed like a living thing, ripping up boulders and flinging them across the valley. Lightning slashed purple and green through the sky, and the earth shook as if trying to tear itself apart. Jacob huddled inside his cave, fire crackling weakly, clutching his notebook to his chest. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling. Outside, the world howled. "For the first time," he whispered, "maybe this is it." But then he laughed, because even at the brink, he couldn't help himself. "Final night in the resort package, huh? Gotta give the guests a grand finale." And so he went to work. Jacob anchored his hammock remnants as windbreaks. He reinforced the cave with Centigorgon bones, wedging them into the ceiling like ribs of a cathedral. He built a fire bigger than ever, using the last of his brush. The flames leapt against the storm's fury, a tiny beacon of human defiance. When lightning struck the valley floor, Jacob scrambled outside and used the shards it left behind as makeshift torches, driving back predators that had been stirred by the chaos. At one point, a swarm of insectoids came crawling up the cliff, their mandibles snapping. Jacob met them head-on, swinging a flaming rib bone like a baseball bat, screaming, "Welcome to the night show, ladies and gentlemen!" The swarm retreated into the storm, hissing. Jacob stood panting, hair plastered to his forehead, face smeared with soot and sweat. And through it all, he felt something strange, exhilaration. This wasn't despair. This was living. This was humanity's oldest story, facing chaos and laughing at it. By dawn, the storm broke. The sky cleared into pale lavender again, the twin suns rising over a valley torn and reshaped. Jacob stood outside his cave, exhausted but alive, surveying the wreckage of Camp Human. Half the sign had collapsed. His rock gardens were scattered. His fire pit was rubble. But he was still standing. And that was all that mattered. Day 30 arrived with eerie calm. Jacob woke to silence, then the distant hum of engines. Looking up, he saw the Dominion shuttle descending like a vulture, its hull gleaming black against the sky. Dust billowed as it landed in the valley, right near Centigorgon's skeleton. The hatch hissed open. Out stepped 3 alien officers, their bodies armored in chitin, mandibles clicking as they looked around. Their multifaceted eyes swept over the bones, the cliffside sign, the cave-turn lodge. They froze, clearly struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Jacob stepped out of the cave, holding his notebook under one arm. He was barefoot, shirt torn, covered in grime. But he was smiling like a man who had just conquered the universe. "Welcome to Camp Human," he said cheerfully, bowing slightly. "Checkout is at noon, but I can extend your stay for a small fee." The aliens stared at him. Finally, the leader hissed, You did not merely survive. You thrived. This was not the purpose of the trial. Jacob shrugged. That's the thing about humans. We don't do barely survive. We build. We adapt. We turn death traps into vacation spots. It's kind of our thing. The officer's mandibles clicked in frustration. You were meant to suffer. To prove weakness. Instead, Jacob said, tapping his notebook, I proved you've got one hell of a tourist destination here. With some marketing, infrastructure, and maybe a safety waiver, Zyrith 9 could be the galaxy's hottest extreme vacation getaway. Think about it, face death, find yourself, only at Camp Human. You'll make a fortune. The aliens were silent. Jacob just grinned wider. Finally, one of the younger officers murmured, almost to itself. They turn hardship into opportunity, even here. Jacob raised his arms, gesturing around at the valley. Exactly. You gave me a nightmare, and I made it a business plan. You call this survival. I call this Tuesday. The leader hissed again, but this time there was no confidence in it. Just confusion. Jacob took a deep breath, letting the lavender air fill his lungs. So 30 days are up. What's next? You going to drag me back in chains? Or are you going to admit that humans don't just play your games, we rewrite them? The aliens exchanged glances. None spoke. Finally, Jacob closed his notebook and tucked it under his arm. Thought so? Well, tell your bosses thanks for the free vacation. I'll be sending them my bill. And with that, he walked toward the shuttle, shoulders squared, grin unshakable. Hours later, as the Dominion ship left orbit, alien officers argued furiously in their command chamber. Some insisted the human was a dangerous anomaly. Others whispered that perhaps humans were something more, creatures who could not be broken by trials, only sharpened by them. But far below, carved into the cliffs of Zyrith 9, the sign remained. Welcome to Camp Human. The bones of Centigorgon stood like a monument. The valley carried the echoes of laughter. And in every corner of the galaxy where the story spread, aliens would shudder as they whispered. They put him on Zyrith 9 for 30 days. He turned it into a vacation spot. The end. Subscribe to the Void Narratives for more tales where humanity proves why we are the galaxy's strangest, scariest, and most unstoppable species.